This is Rita Barrett from Harleysville, Pennsylvania. You're listening to the International Radio Report on CKUT 90.3 FM in Montreal.
Welcome, everybody, to the International Radio Report for Sunday, April the 6th. We thank you for tuning in here on CKUT in Montreal. My name's Sheldon. I'm here with Jill, and we do have a special guest with us today. We'll get to him in just a couple minutes. We do want to remind you once again of the upcoming 38th annual NASWA SWL Festival. It is taking place April the 25th and the 26th of this year. It is a hybrid event with an in-person element in Fort Washington, Pennsylvania, and of course on Zoom for those who cannot make it to the live event. The registration is open, and the discounted price of $15, which was supposed to end on April the 1st, has been extended. So if you didn't get to it, you won't have to pay that $20 fee. They're going to extend the $15 fee for a little bit longer. We have heard from Richard and John, the organizers of the event, that they have about 45 people registered right now for the in-person event. The maximum for the in-person is 65 people. So if you were planning on going in person, you need to get your reservation in quickly. Same with the hotels, if you're planning on staying there. If you're on Zoom, well, you can register right up to the start of the event, but they have stressed that they will not be taking any reservations for either Zoom or in person after the event has started. They need to focus their attention on getting everything together. Putting a hybrid event together is tricky. It takes a lot of coordination, so they will not be taking additional registrations after the start of the event. We at CIDX, of course, will be hosting the hospitality suite throughout the weekend, so we do hope to see a lot of you checking in there. And you can go to the website to check out all the seminars and workshops and forums that will be going on and other activities throughout the weekend. So check out SWLFEST, that's SWLfest.com, and you can get all the information you need there to register, NASWA.net. Looking forward to that coming up April 25th and 26th. I mentioned we have a guest with us, and for anybody who was a longtime fan of Radio Canada International, you're probably going to recognize the name, and maybe you'll recognize the voice. We have with us Wojtek Gwiazda. He is the spokesperson for the RCI Action Committee, and for 35 years was the host producer with the English section of Radio Canada International. He's now retired, living here in Montreal, enjoying himself since 2015 in retirement, I'm assuming. And we thank him for popping in here today. And there's a very good reason why he's here, so we'll get to that shortly. Welcome, Wojtek.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here again.
It's been a while, yeah.
Many years. Every time
we were talking before the show started that it's been quite a while. There were several times over the years, all pretty much tied to Radio Canada International.
That's right.
And all the events that have taken place over the years with RCI. The reason we invited Wojtek today is that he recently had an opinion piece published in the Hill Times in Ottawa, which is entitled Time to Restore Radio Canada International, or Canada's World Service. Why did you do this?
Well, when the news came out that the Voice of America got shut down and the other international broadcasters, the U.S., right off made me think, here's another international broadcaster in a different kind of situation, but getting shut down. And I wasn't the only one. I started seeing people mentioning Radio Canada International. Among them, Canadian Ambassador Roman Waschuk tweeted, or on X now, Canada already has a bilingual public broadcaster with multi-channel, multimedia offerings. With the nuking of U.S. international broadcasting, there's a niche that a multilingual Radio Canada International, drawing on our existing platforms, could fill for a world in info turmoil. And even more surprising, a former diplomat and former Conservative cabinet minister in Canada, Chris Alexander, tweeted, with opposition and support, the federal government should relaunch Radio Canada International on a larger scale, prioritizing news in English, French, Russian, and he lists a whole bunch of other languages. And that was just a bit of the kinds of things that I was seeing online. And it was coming from people who have experience with international broadcasting. It was coming from people who were experts in foreign affairs or ambassadors. And I thought, well, we have to remind people that Radio Canada International exists, even in a very small kind of version of it, and that it would be important to resuscitate and restore Radio Canada International so that people would at least get the story of how Canadians are now, coping with the things that are happening to it. And I got a hold of the editor of the Hill Times, and the Hill Times is read by a lot of politicians in Ottawa, and that was the reason I got a hold of them. And that's how they agreed to it, and that's why I wrote the opinion piece.
Jill, you have a lot of contact with people through your live shows on YouTube. You've been, and I'm sure you've seen some of the postings as well. What's the reaction been to what's happening in the United States, and are people looking towards Canada?
There's a lot of people that are obviously not happy and are, the number of "I'm so sorry what's happening" is incredible. And there is talk about Radio Canada, missing Radio Canada International, and having that voice so that, they can understand even more about what's happening. How are we reacting here in Canada with all of the things happening right now, plus the whole world also. Sometimes talk about in the live shows of, it could restart on shortwave with a price tag that is much less than before, simply because it could use relays. It could use some other shortwave transmitters that are out there, and that would cost a lot less than having your own transmitter site. A lot of people are missing Radio Canada International. I would say it's in the top 3, top 5 of what are the stations that I miss the most on shortwave. RCI is there all the time.
Yeah, we've always heard that from people. And, when you hear RCI mentioned in the same breath as BBC World Service, that sort of everybody measures their services against, it makes you feel pretty proud that we are that well respected around the world with the broadcast that we were putting out. Now, you mentioned about options. We have options available to us now that didn't exist before. The infrastructure that was there, unfortunately, is not going to come back. Sackville is gone. It's been torn down. Some people were saying, well, we could revive Sackville. Well, that's probably not going to happen.
Well, the transmitters got demolished.
Right.
And that land no longer belongs to CBC or RCI.
Right.
So that option is not there.
Yeah. Now, these other options that are out there, as Jill said, are certainly available. There are other international broadcasters using them. And I think with everything going on right now, we don't know what's going to happen with Voice of America. I mean, it may come back. If it does come back, what is it going to sound like? Probably not what it sounded like up to now. Everybody's kind of concerned about that. What image is going to be projected from the U.S. to the rest of the world through services like Voice of America. We're happy to see that some of the other services, Radio Free Europe, Radio Free Asia, those types of things, are somehow managing to creep back onto the air. Some new services have even popped up in a few areas, broadcasting to some areas of the planet that really need some broadcasts going into them right now. It would be really nice to have another voice from this part of the world to give some balance out there, because everything right now is so complicated. Wojtek, you were a part of it for a very long time, and you saw the appreciation from the audience in so many different countries.
That's very true. People trusted us because, we did not appear, Canada and Radio Canada International did not appear have an axe to grind, to be propaganda. I remember getting letters of people saying, why do you criticize your country so much? we tried to be as honest as possible when we were talking about Canada and the situation in Canada. And I think, and you're right, we were right behind BBC, even though we only had a fraction of their budget. And so for me, and for a lot of us who are involved with RCI, it's knowing that once you have a chance to do your job and to tell people around the world about Canada, that's all you need. We were good at it. I think one of the problems right now, although all of us have seen that there's some interest in RCI coming back, I think one of the big problems is a lot of people think that we've disappeared, that we no longer exist. When we stopped broadcasting on shortwave in 2012, a lot of people just thought we disappeared, and that's disheartening because there are a few people who still are manning and working at RCI. They're trying to do the best they can within a very difficult kind of situation. And I think what's important, and one of the reasons I wrote this article, this opinion piece, is that there's got to be a determined decision to restore Radio Canada International. And that means making sure that the international mandate is understood. Just because your program, whether it's a podcast, streaming, shortwave program, is heard outside of Canada does not mean that it's an international broadcast. It's what RCI was doing was explaining to people outside of Canada who knew little or maybe nothing about Canada what the situation was in Canada, what our concerns were, and that was our strength. And people respected us for doing that. But to be able to do that, there's going to have to be a decision made, and also protection in terms of Radio Canada International's relationship with CBC and Radio-Canada, because our domestic broadcaster faces its own obstacles in terms of funding, in terms of being able to get programs out and all of that. But they do not understand international broadcasting. And once budget situations gave them control over Radio Canada International, it changed the way RCI did programming. It changed it from what we were doing in terms of very focused on outside of Canada, and it started looking inward towards the immigrant communities and that. And so for RCI to be restored, there's got to be formal protection, not only on a financial level and an administrative level, but also on an editorial level. Up until, I'd say, the 90s, before the budget problems, it was the RCI director who made decisions on programming in consultation with the government, in consultation with Foreign Affairs, but it was not CBC that was making those decisions. And unless we can get that kind of structure, RCI is always going to be in a problem situation. And also, just like the BBC and other international broadcasters, there's got to be funding that's protected, that's there, because once you start scraping away the financing, you start not being able to do your job properly.
I think one of the things that is showing up is that RCI was great when it was actually taken care of by the Foreign Affairs Department rather than being integrated with CBC Radio-Canada.
The way I remember it, and I talked to our former program director about that, Alan Familian, he would consult with Foreign Affairs on what were their interests and what areas, and then that would influence what we would do. And I would give you an example. In 1989, we were planning to have a Chinese section, and then Tiananmen Square happened, and in consultation with the government, we suddenly, 2 weeks after the attacks in Tiananmen Square, we were on air with the Chinese programming. So it was a consultative kind of situation where we were already planning to do this. And there were other similar situations when we started broadcasting to Asia, to South Asia, to India. It was a reflection of some of the concerns of Canada. But again, we weren't there as a propaganda tool. We weren't there as a state broadcaster. We weren't there as the voice of Foreign Affairs. But you're right. we are what the foreign affairs people call cultural diplomacy or soft power. It's not military, it's not political, it's basically creating mutual understanding. And that's a huge force. We always use BBC as our point of reference. Well, BBC is trusted because it's seen as fairly neutral and honest and so we had that kind of a reputation also, and it's important to maintain that reputation. So yes, there ought to be coordination with foreign affairs, and it makes sense for us to rent studios and facilities from CBC Radio-Canada, but RCI needs to be protected as a separate unit. And also, there ought to be a public relations department explaining what it is that Radio-Canada International does, because it's Canadian taxpayers paying for it. They don't immediately understand why that makes sense. That's where we also need to help people understand, well, if you want, other countries to do business with you, if you want trade, if you want tourism, why would you come to Canada? Well, you would come to Canada because you heard there's these amazing falls, Niagara Falls in Ontario, or you've heard that you can eat amazing seafood out east. Where are you going to hear about that? In a context that you'll understand. You'll hear it on Radio-Canada International.
We're speaking with Wojtek Gwiazda of the RCI Action Committee. We're going to just step in here and get you up to date on things going on with the Sun, as we usually do, and we'll be back right after that.
So what's happening with our Sun? Our Sun this week was once again quite active. A lot of solar flares and a lot of disturbance once again in our geomagnetic field meant that conditions were not all the best. Again, this week was kind of a little complicated. Add to that we have a solar radiation storm, but things are quieting down, and there's still quite a few sunspots. One is crackling with some small flares, but hopefully it's going to actually be better in the week ahead. The sunspot number is 124, the solar flux 178. You will need a radio, and you got to listen.
This is John Fisher of North Chelmsford, Massachusetts. I listen to the International Radio Report every Sunday morning at 10:30 on CKUT 90.3 FM in the fair city of Montreal.
All right, we are back with Wojtek, and before our break there, you mentioned about making people understand the difference between domestic and international broadcasting. And I think we're seeing that in the U.S. right now. Plug has been pulled on Voice of America and other services run by the USAGM, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, etc., which we talked about in the last couple of weeks. I think there was a budget for Voice of America and these services of several hundreds of millions of dollars, and everything seems to have a price tag on it right now. And, for the U.S. government now to everything is save money, save money, save money. Pull the plug on a VOA service and those international broadcasting services. And I think a lot of American citizens didn't even know what Voice of America was, probably didn't know that there was international broadcasting going outside from the U.S. to outside. So it's an easy grab. And it was a similar situation here in Canada. You'd have to dig a little hard to find Canadians who really knew that we had this international service. And that's sad. Like you said, publicity is required to make people understand what this thing is and why do you need it. A lot of countries probably weren't very good at promoting it within their own countries. They were concerned with the outside audience and, forgetting where the money was coming from.
And that happened on a whole bunch of levels. There used to be television commercials, kind of aimed to Canadians, saying if you're traveling, you can, get news from Canada. But it also made people aware that we existed. The other thing that happened was Canadian embassies around the world used to have our program schedules in the embassy, wherever they were in the country. Things like that got cut back. And, you're talking about the Voice of America, the money being taken out. And so every time there was a budget cut, we'd lose public relations department. We'd stop sending out program schedules. We'd stop the television commercials. In 2012, our budget got cut 80%. And, there was some controversy among people who were aware of what we were doing, but not that much because we had already disappeared off the radar of a lot of people. And right now, that's going to be the biggest hurdle that we're going to have, is so many people are convinced that we're gone. One other thing I want to raise before we leave this topic is, we've talked about shortwave, but one of the amazing things now is all the different technologies that allow us to get information out. When RCI initially was sharing some of its programming, not only did it do on shortwave, but it did it on records, on vinyl records, and then they did it on cassettes, then they did it on CDs. Now, with a click of a button, we can send a program out into the world, and it can be streaming, it can be a podcast, it can be a program that another radio station in another country can broadcast. And so there are so many different ways of getting this programming out. And I get back to my key point, is that we have to understand what a world service does and why it exists. And what it does, in the case of Canada, we don't have a Time magazine. We don't have, these media that are known worldwide. RCI was known worldwide, and one of the things that some of our CBC and Radio Canada foreign affairs correspondents discovered was, if they said they were from CBC, nobody really knew what that was, let's say in some African country. But if you said Radio Canada International, oh yeah, we know Radio Canada International. We have to get back to that, because right now you've got to be somebody who has access to the internet, who has, who's aware that we exist, to be able to listen to us. And also we have to get into more regular programming. We don't have newscasts anymore at RCI. How do you get people to regularly listen to you if you don't have something that gets updated a lot every single day? So there's a lot of challenges, but it's possible, and it's possible with a very small group of people. And that was one of the reasons that we were so popular, is that we manage with very few people in comparison to other international broadcasters to do a lot of programming.
Some of the decision makers in Ottawa, hopefully reading your opinion piece, these are probably a lot of younger people there now who weren't even around, weren't even exposed to Radio Canada International before. They may have heard about it from somebody, but it's like trying to start fresh and try to introduce these people to make them understand what this thing is, and that it's worth coming back. I think that's going to be a huge challenge, though.
Yes, but on the other hand, we're all aware of all the misinformation that's around. And if we can guarantee an honest journalistic institution getting wide support and being able to kind of counter some of the misinformation that's around, I think even those younger politicians will understand. Now, obviously, the timing of this is a little tough, because if there was an election on, then it would be a lot easier to lobby the government and the opposition parties and say, hey, get your act together, find some money, because it wouldn't take a lot of money. It's basically, once you have enough employees to be able to do the kind of programming that I'm imagining, it's a piece of cake. Then it's easy to do. But we're in an election situation where we have to wait for somebody to get elected, and then the timing is not great, because this would be the ideal time to restore Radio Canada International. But right now, until we have an election result, that's not going to happen.
You look back, one service that really I think about now all the time is that RCI was one of the few international broadcasters that had programming in Ukrainian. Wouldn't it have been such an important thing to the people in Ukraine right now, over the last couple of years, using a inexpensive portable shortwave radio, to be able to hear that friendly voice from Canada that they heard for decades?
That's
we
right.
had such this important relationship. The government came to RCI years ago and said, we have this connection with Ukraine. We're going to broadcast in Ukrainian. And there weren't that many countries doing that. I'm sure if they had that opportunity to hear RCI again in Ukrainian today, it would be just amazing for it to happen. And what a better time for it to happen as well, with what's going on. But it's going to be a challenge. Have you received reaction yet to the piece you wrote?
Not directly, a little bit, but I think this is the big challenge: is that on one hand, people are not aware, and I think the other challenge is that the people that are aware are a little tired of hearing about restoring Radio Canada International, and that's a double whammy that's difficult. On the other hand, all you need is one minister, one prime minister. I mean, we were saved in 1991 when a prime minister said, no, we're not shutting down Radio Canada International. The same thing with the Chinese service. We need a Chinese service? Okay, move it up. If there's a will, and the will comes, for politicians, the will comes from people basically doing what I'm doing, lobbying them and saying, look, you got to wake up. You've got to see how useful this is. It's, one of the most tragic things about RCI is when you look at the history of RCI and everything that we did. And I'll give you one example. In 1947, we started recording Canadian musicians, putting it on vinyl, and mailing it out to the world so that it could be played. And we're talking about major stars like Oscar Peterson, Gilles Vigneault. Anybody that you can think of was recorded by Radio Canada International. That was just one part of the kind of job, because we weren't just doing news. We were doing current affairs and we were doing cultural things. All of this bringing Canada to the world.
Was Canadian content before it was mandated.
Yeah, exactly.
That's really what it was. Wow. We could go on for a long time, but we're going to put links up, for our listeners to follow this story. Hopefully something will materialize from it. Just got to keep plugging away. We appreciate you dropping in here today.
Yeah, pleasure.
And, keeping up the good fight is what it's all about. So thanks very much.
Yeah, we have upcoming ham radio contests.
All right, very good. We have a number of things going on next weekend for you, so we'll get to those quickly. Starting off, the Japan International DX CW contest. It's organized by the Japan International DX Contest Group. It runs from 700 Zulu April 12th to 1300 Zulu April the 13th. And it's a CW event, and it's on all the major HF bands, 1.8 through 28 megahertz.
We have the interest group RTTY that has the worldwide RTTY contest, 1200 Zulu April 12th to 1800 Zulu April 13th. The bands are 3.5, 7, 14, 21, and 28 megahertz. And of course, it's radio teletype.
The Straight Key Century Club is holding their weekend sprintathon, 1200 Zulu April 12th to 2359 Zulu April 13th, 160 through 10 meters, none of the work bands available, and the mode is CW.
We have the Czech Radio Club that has the OKOMDX contest, SSB, 1200 Zulu April 12th to 1159 Zulu April 13th. Bands are 1.8 through 28 megahertz, except the work bands, and it's an SSB mode.
The Sandia Vista Amateur Radio Club is organizing the New Mexico QSO Party, 1400 Zulu April 12th to 0200 Zulu April 13th, 160 all the way through 2 meter bands, and it is a phone, CW, and digital event.
And we have the Georgia QSO Party, 1800 Zulu April 12th to 2359 Zulu April 13th, organized by the North Fulton Amateur Radio League, bands 160 through 6 meters, mode phone and CW. And with this, we are out of time.
We thank you for tuning in. We can be reached by email, radioreport@yahoo.com. Our show is live streamed and archived at ckut.ca. Our Facebook group, International Radio Report, we invite you to join the group. And if you want to listen to the show at your leisure and your convenience, our YouTube channel is available, youtube.com/@IRR, and you can subscribe to get info on all the new shows that go up there. Thanks once again, Wojtek, for guesting with us here today. Keep us up to date on any further developments. And we thank everyone for tuning in today. We'll do it all again next week here on the International Radio Report on CKUT 90.3 FM in Montreal. Bye-bye for now.
Bye-bye.